Today, I believe I reflect the overwhelming majority of the American people in expressing enormous sadness and anger at the vicious murder of George Floyd. This police murder is an outrage that strikes at the very heart of our society. But we have to bear in mind that this one murder is just the latest manifestation of a system that so callously devalues the lives of Black people. Over the last many years, both as a senator and a candidate for president, I have had the privilege of visiting almost every state in our country. In those travels, I have experienced some incredibly beautiful and inspiring moments with the people I met. But I must also tell you that I've had moments which made me embarrassed about the state of our country, meeting too many families in too many communities who have suffered from police violence and social and economic neglect. In most cases, these victims and their families have been denied justice by a system that ignores these ongoing assaults against the bodies and the dignity of Black people. If ever there was a time for us to address this egregious assault on everything our country is supposed to stand for, now is that time. Every killing by a police officer must be independently investigated by the Department of Justice. Every police officer guilty of a murder must be held accountable, including those who stand by and do nothing to intervene. We need a massive overhaul of policing in America which understands that a lethal response is the last response, not the first response. But let us be clear. Police violence is not the only manifestation of the systemic racism that is taking place. Take a look at what's going on with the COVID-19 pandemic. In recent months, we have seen Black and brown communities disproportionately ravaged by the virus. We have seen workers who earn starvation wages forced to go to work day in and day out because without that paycheck, they and their families would go hungry. These working class families, Black and white and brown, have with enormous courage kept our economy and society together in hospitals, meatpacking plants, public transportation, supermarkets, gas stations, and elsewhere. These workers, Black and brown, have risked infection and death so that the rest of us can continue to eat, get our medicines, or put gas in our cars. But when we talk about systemic racism, we're not just talking about Black lives killed by police with no accountability. We're not just talking about Black lives killed by COVID-19. We're not just talking about a third of Black children in our country living in poverty and millions of Black kids going to totally inadequate schools. We're not just talking about Black women having a maternal death rate 3 times the rate of white women and Black families owning 1/10 the wealth of white families. Instead, we are talking about a system of pervasive racism that impacts every aspect of our lives. This has got to end. We need equity for Black people, for brown people, and for all who are marginalized and made disposable in a system and an economy that treats millions of people as unworthy of the basic decency of human respect. Our struggle is and has always been about justice. Not justice on paper, but real justice in the real lives of real people. Sadly, as we come together in the fight for justice, as we fight against racism, as we fight against massive unemployment and poverty, right-wing demagogues exploit moments like this to tear us apart and reinforce systems of racism and oppression. At this critical moment in our nation's history, at a time when we need a president who brings us together against injustice, we have a president who is opportunistically moving us down a path toward authoritarianism and violence. And he stands astride a grotesque system of ingrained racism and economic disparity that now more than ever needs to be ripped down. We've seen yet another sad example of this just the other night.
Any difficulty and we will assume control, but when the looting starts, the shooting starts.
While Trump claims to care about Black lives, he now publicly advocates for armed violence against people in black communities. No, Mr. President, this is not a time to encourage police officers to do more shooting. That is exactly the problem we have to overcome. What a sad period this is for our democracy and for fundamental moral decency. Do I believe that Trump's views reflect the feelings of the people of this country? No, I don't. I don't believe that for a moment. I have looked into the faces of too many people all across our country, from every background, from every zip code. And despite their differences, what our people want is a nation that respects the fundamental human dignity of every person. That starts with justice for George Floyd. But it must not end there. We have got to end the racism, oppression, and massive inequality that currently exists if we are to have a future that is worthy of all of our people. Thank you very much.